I'm not sure if I should admit how dedicated of the Game Awards viewer I am. Even before getting into the industry myself, the feeling of watching something like the Oscars for my favorite type of media was always a blast. 9 times out of 10, I'm totally fine with the majority of the nominees. But 2025, at least in the indie space, feels different to me. Now, as a reviewer and writer, my actual favorite thing to do on a professional level is highlight incredible indie titles that you might not have heard of otherwise. At the time of writing this article, I've personally reviewed 33 games this year, many of which have been charming indies that stole my heart by the end. That's why I'm a little bummed that so many of my favorites missed the cut at the Game Awards. Don't get me wrong though, the nominees for Best Indie Game as well as Best Debut Indie Game are wonderful. I'm of the mind that Claire Obscura is probably stretching this category a bit far, but it's also probably my personal game of the decade, so I'm also not going to throw a fit about it. That said, I think the indie categories really should belong to, well, something that doesn't look and feel like a AAA title by every other metric. With all of that said, I think there are 10 particular indies from 2025 that deserved a nod for something at the Game Awards. It's time to give them their flowers.
I understand that including Lost in Random The Eternal Die at TGA is a bit of a tough sell in a year that also saw Hades 2 release into its 1.0 version. But I'll try to pitch it to you anyway. Another isometric roguelite where you're tasked with completing one perfect run in a single attempt, The Eternal Die is actually quite easily the best non-Hades title I've ever played in the genre. Assuredly, it's not as deep, layered, and challenging as Hades, but I also think that's where a lot of the game's value lies too. I gave this one a strong 8.5 upon release, and that's because The Eternal Die is dripping with amazing art, charm, style, interesting genre mix-ups, and rewarding meta progression, all well packaged as a bit more of an approachable experience overall. That is, until you unlock the difficulty modifiers after one run, and then can attempt to complete the whole thing again. Don't sleep on this if you're into the genre.
Ender Magnolia Bloom in the Mist is the amazing sequel to the also incredible Ender Lilies Quietus of the Night. While this was a game that originally came into early access back in 2024, it finally saw its full 1.0 release in January of this year. I can't help but think the EA period combined with a super early 2025 1.0 release just kept Ender Magnolia too far from the panel's minds, because I'm not sure why else it would have missed the cut. This is a side-scrolling, Souls-ish, Metroidvania, and RPG with beautiful art and music that hides some pretty crushingly challenging bosses for anyone diving into it without taking it seriously enough at first. The combat gimmick here is awesome, as main character Lilac uses summons to launch every single attack instead of ever actually going on the direct offensive herself. Ender Lilies was already a bit of a hidden champ, and Ender Magnolia genuinely improved upon it in every possible way. It's been locked into an overwhelmingly positive Steam rating since release, and I don't see that ever changing.
I love a good solo developer success story, and Look Outside is yet another that joins the ranks of games like Undertale, Axiom Verge, Stardew Valley, and Balatro in this regard. Look Outside is the brainchild of Francis Columb, which seems like a pretty unsettling yet incredible place to visit if the results of the game are any indicator. Look Outside isn't gaining the same traction as those aforementioned solo games above, though, and that's a darn shame. Midway through 2025, we dubbed it one of the top 4 best indies in the year so far, and I'd still like to contend that it deserves some type of shot at the Game Awards. This is one you don't want to know a ton about going into it, but if you're someone that's down for a chillingly creepy and unnerving horror RPG, then you really don't need to search any further than Look Outside this year, but maybe check under the bed and in the closet before you jump in. The Séance of Blake Manor is the most under-the-radar game on this entire list. Allow me to remedy that. Released in October, this game has garnered absolutely ravenous reviews from players and critics alike. It's overwhelmingly positive on Steam and sits at a jaw-dropping 92 aggregate score on OpenCritic, second only to Hades 2 and tied with Claire Obscura. So yeah, that's a huge deal.
This game draws a lot of Blueprint's comparisons thanks to the vibe and art style, but it also feels like it's pulling from previously nominated games like Return of the Obra Dinn, while also carving out its own identity entirely. It's a detective, adventure, puzzle title that fans of the genre really need to stop sleeping on if they haven't checked it out already.
I gave Fretless The Wrath of Riffson a 9 when it came out. I stand by the review 100%, with the only caveat that sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I could have gone even higher. I truly love this game. On the surface, I didn't have insane expectations for a game commissioned by YouTube musician Rob Scallon. Well, Rob, you and Ritual Studios really did the dang thing with this one. Fretless is the self-proclaimed world's first guitar RPG, which is a cute way of drive home the rhythm-based, turn-based deck-building combat style you'll be using from start to finish. It's a bit hard to explain in such a short amount of time, but suffice to say it's definitely one of the coolest, most satisfying combat styles I've ever seen in a turn-based video game. My actual only complaint about Fretless is that it's just too short. Still, that doesn't take away from how top tier and unique an RPG journey it is while you're in it. At the very least, this game deserved a nod for best music because the soundtrack absolutely ramps.
What can I say about Bionic Bay that hasn't already been said? If you're a fan of challenging side-scrolling platformers and you haven't played this game, you're doing something wrong. Bionic Bay took a lot of comparisons to games like Limbo, but it's more like 2D Portal than anything else. I've never played a platformer that makes me feel quite as smart as Bionic Bay as I figure out a new way to leverage the game's abilities, and then quite as stupid when I can't string together the necessary platforming to make it through a particularly tricky sequence. The game's creator, Juhana Milas, told me earlier in the year that it's a bit of a rage-bait title, and while I get the sentiment, I still tend to disagree. Really, Bionic Bay is one of the tightest, most precise platformers ever created, and once it all clicks, hold on to your hats, gamers. In addition to all of this, the game's art style is very possibly the most detailed, most beautiful, hand-drawn pixel work that I've ever seen in my life. And I would know, I started gaming on the NES. The original Citizen Sleeper is awesome. The sequel, Citizen Sleeper 2, Starward Vector, is equally as awesome. Any questions? Described as a dice-driven RPG, it's also got a supremely unique gimmick that allows it to stand apart from the crowd of similar games and the extremely narrative-heavy variant of role-playing games. If you're a fan of science fiction, love a deep game, and are down to read a lot, then Citizen Sleeper 2 could very likely become one of your favorite indie experiences of the year as well. Citizen Sleeper 2 is a title where every single choice will have a consequence, and it'll be up to you as the android protagonist to figure out just how to navigate each and every new scenario that manifests due to your own decisions.
I mean this as no slight towards any of the following games, but here are some titles that Pipistrello and the Cursed Yoyo scored higher than on OpenCritic this year. Ghost of Yotei, Arc Raiders, Mario Kart World, Absalom, and Silent Hill F. All of these are lovely games that got recognized at the Game Awards in one way or another. That's why I'm banging the drum calling for #justice for Pipistrello. In fact, Pipistrello's 88 aggregate score on OpenCritic has it tied for number 18 out of anything else released this year. It also currently has 98% positive reviews on Steam, in addition to the sky-high scores from the critics. If you aren't drawn in automatically by the GBA-era art style, let me tell you more about why Pipistrello rules. It's a self-described Yovania, where you'll navigate 1,000 screens across the entire game, full of interesting yo-yo combat, traversal with unique movement mechanics, and a fun and vibrant cast of characters and bosses alike. It's kind of old-school Zelda, kind of Metroid, and kind of Paper Mario, but brought to the modern era with every quality of life improvement you wish the old games had.
Despite being second on this list, Sword of the Sea is the snub from the 2025 Game Awards that actually surprised me the most. With Journey, DNA, and coming from the same team as Abzu and the Pathless, I thought Sword of the Sea was a shoo-in for several categories. Best Indie, Best Art Design, Best Music, take your pick. We gave the game a 10, and I agree with everything a reviewer said back when it launched. The game is stunning, Austin Wintory's score is breathtaking, and the surfing, skateboarding, sandboarding mechanics take the foundation laid by Journey and deliver a gameplay style that's simply fun from start to finish. Honestly, I can't figure out what happened with this one. Again, I'd be the first to tell you that the TGA nominees deserve their place at the show, but there needed to be a seat at the table for Sword of the Sea somewhere.
If you're into the deck building genre, then you already know about Monster Train and its 2025 sequel. Slay the Spire is one of my favorite games ever released, and I had many moments during my time with Monster Train 2 that I had to splash cold water on my face when I'd start to think that this game was possibly even better. Honestly, depending on what you're looking for from the genre, it might be. Monster Train 2 is a deck builder with a ton of depth and seemingly infinite numbers of ways to customize and tweak and attempt at taking over heaven. There's not a better feeling in gaming than seeing one of your perfectly set up train cars absolutely decimate any enemies that dare step aboard your locomotive. This is a game with tons of unlocks, awesome bosses, insane card synergies, fun random events, and sincerely anything and everything a deck building expert could ever dream of. If it were up to me, Monster Train 2 would have been right up there with the rest of the titles nominated for Best Indie Game.